Well, the fact that the lighting makes me look like Two-Face, or maybe a stylized picture of Jekyll and Hyde, is actually pretty appropriate because now we come to the Incredible Hulk, the 2008 film, which both served as Marvel's reintroduction to the Hulk in preparation for the Avengers, but also kind of trying to wipe the slate clean after Ang Lee's 2003 version. Now, while I don't think the 2003 version is that terrible, I still really don't like it. um, but we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about Louis Leterrier's The Incredible Hulk. And I'm just going to say this right off the bat, just to leave out any ambiguity as to my opinion. I really, really like this movie. I mean, without thinking about it too hard, and I know I'm in a minority on this, this is probably one of, if not my favorite, Avenger setup movie. I mean, good God, I really like this movie, and hopefully, as I go on, you will be able to see why. But the film basically starts with it's not an origin story. It's more of a day in the life of Bruce Banner, sort of tale, because the origin story of the Hulk is actually gotten out of the way in the opening credits. I mean, they show a quick montage. And that's one of the things that I was frustrated with The Amazing Spider-Man. Is that you don't need to do the origin story again if it's already been done 5 years prior. Which, yeah, Amazing Spider-Man, fastest reboot in history. Well, not quite, because this was 5 years after Ang Lee's Hulk, But yeah, with the origin story of the Hulk, you can really just do it in the opening credits and just have little moments throughout the movie that kind of further elaborate on any fuzzy spots. I mean, if you watch this movie, then yeah, you'll have a pretty good general idea of what the Hulk is, why he is the way he is, what caused him to become the Hulk, etc., etc. So really, the basic plot revolves around Bruce Banner on the run from the military, led by General Thunderbolt Ross. Thunderbolt is not his real name. And I don't really think they call him Thunderbolt in the movie. That's just his comic book nickname. But Bruce Banner, played by Edward Norton, is on the run from General Ross, played by William Hurt, and also Ross's new recruit, a veteran born in Russia, raised in England, named Emil Blonsky, played by Tim Roth. Yes. And while he is trying to do this, he is also attempting to find a cure to his condition. He desperately wants to be cured of his little tendency to turn into an enormous green muscular monster whenever he gets angry. So that's the basic gist. I don't really want to give too much away, but I will say that it brings him into contact with a few other characters, like his old flame Betty Ross, daughter of General Ross, who is played by Liv Tyler, and a scientist that he has been communicating with, named Stearns, played by Tim Blake Nelson. Now, why do I like this movie? Because I do acknowledge that it is flawed. Well, honestly, one of the biggest advantages of this movie is the acting. Edward Norton makes for a fantastic Bruce Banner, and this is another case where I'm in somewhat of a minority. or at least to my knowledge, because Edward Norton is probably my favorite Bruce Banner, and I hear a lot of people nowadays saying, well, Mark Ruffalo was even better in the Avengers. I don't think that's true. Because the thing with well, I'll get to Mark Ruffalo when I get to Mark Ruffalo, but the thing I really like about Edward Norton is that he really conveys the sheer desperation of the character. I mean, this really seems like a guy who's at the end of his rope in terms of hoping for the best, while at the same time, despite the fact that he has lost so much, you can really sense a real sort of grim initiative behind that. So the way that Norton plays that, A, it's very believable, and B, you really get into his character. I was really fascinated by the character of Bruce Banner in this, and how intense he was. Come to think of it, I don't really think there have been any bad versions of Bruce Banner, or at least not live action, not to my knowledge. Because what was it? You had Bill Bixby in the original Hulk TV series. You had Eric Bana in the Ang Lee Hulk, and the 2003 Hulk sucks, but Eric Bana was pretty good at playing the intensity and the occasional insanity of Bruce Banner. But Edward Norton, I really like his very nuanced performance. And to be honest, it really does come off like he is a real fan of this character. He wants to do this character justice. All the actors play this completely straight. Much like Iron Man, there isn't really anyone winking at the camera. And so yeah, I really like Edward Norton in the role. Liv Tyler is also very good. Although if I had one gripe about her character, Dr. Betty Ross, is that there's not nearly enough time devoted to her actually at home in her field of study. I mean, for the most part, she's just kind of relegated to the King Kong chick. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, she just kind of pals around with Bruce Banner and kind of helps him on his quest. We don't really get to see her do any studies in her field. So when they say that she's Dr. Elizabeth Ross, I say, well, show me, don't tell me. So that's one gripe I have. But with that said, Liv Tyler does provide a lot of humanity for the character of Elizabeth Ross. She does have genuine chemistry with Edward Norton, and she does make for a very believable performance when it comes to a character who lends a sympathetic ear to Bruce Banner's plight. So Liv Tyler's very good. William Hurt is also pretty good. Now, this is one case where I'm probably the most conflicted, because I think Sam Elliott, from a physical perspective, fit the character better in Ang Lee's Hulk. But I don't know. I think William Hurt just puts a lot more energy into the role. I think he just puts a lot more determination, kind of the hard-boiled. He's kind of similar to Norton in that he has grown very desperate at this point. He's willing to pull out all the stops to catch the Hulk, while at the same time he's not nearly as likable as Edward Norton, and that's done by intention. He wants to turn the Hulk into a weapon, and you buy into his motivation just enough, thanks in no small part due to William Hurt's performance, because you really get the sense that this is a guy who really wants to see someone reach the peak of human potential. And why wouldn't he? I mean, he's a general in the army. Of course, he would want soldiers to be the best that they can be. So with all that said, William Hurt plays all of that very subtly, and I think that's where William Hurt is at his best, is when he plays things very subtly. And probably one of my probably one of my favorite villains of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Emil Blonsky, played by Tim Roth. Now, Tim Roth is one of those actors who can elevate a bad movie, and this is by no means a bad movie. But when you see him in, let's just take something like Tim Burton's Planet of the Apes, that movie sucks, but Tim Roth is awesome in that movie. I mean, Tim Roth, if you ask me, he is right up there with Roddy McDowall in terms of actors who have played the apes in the Planet of the Apes series. So he's also very good here. I mean, he plays this soldier who is kind of starting to get past his prime, and the way Roth subtly plays his desire to return to his prime, and how that they kind of tie that in with his hunt for the Hulk and his desire to possess the Hulk's power, I thought was a really clever way to keep him as the main antagonist. Because you could have easily just made General Ross the main antagonist, and for a while it looks like they're going to do that, but the insertion of Emil Blonsky and his motivation in the plot really I think makes for a more compelling villain than Ross. So and Tim Roth is very intense. He is very at times he's actually kind of scary in this movie. So yeah, both he and Edward Norton handle the physical stuff pretty well. I couldn't really detect a whole lot of stunt guys. So yeah, the fact that they were able to do this physical stuff, I don't know. I always admire actors who can do the physical performance as well as the facial performance. And the supporting players like Todd Burrell and Tim Blake Nelson, they do fine. They're not really in the movie enough to make that big of an impact. It's really just the four main players like Bruce Banner, Betty Ross, Thunderbolt Ross, and Emil Blonsky. But the supporting players, they do fine. I mean, it's not really about them so much. But there's one problem that I think a lot of people can point to, is that the script is kind of thin. It's not really as meaty or in depth as some would have liked when talking about a Hulk movie. But taking into account that this is not exactly an origin story, I think that can be forgiven, because yeah, the script is kind of thin. I mean, it really just is, well, a day in the life of Bruce Banner. He tries to get this cure, and his opponents try to stop it, and that's basically it. It doesn't really escalate past that in terms of script. But what I think really elevates this movie, and this has a lot to do with the acting, is a lot of the character moments. I mean, the fact that I really like these characters and I really like seeing them interact, and the movie gives them all appropriate time to breathe, I think more than makes up for the slightly thin script. I mean, that's really what this movie excels at, is balancing the action scenes and the chase scenes, and this very almost breakneck pace, with the more atmospheric scenes where you just let the characters, be people. Just let them rest. Just let them interact. So, taking that into account, the action scenes themselves are thrilling, in my opinion. They are fantastic. They don't go too over the top, although it's kind of hard not to go over the top when you're dealing with a character like the Hulk. But the thing is, there's no shaky cam, and the thing that I really admire about this movie is that they use the Hulk pretty sparingly. He really only hulks out and goes on a rampage 3 times. three times, yeah, three. So taking that and spreading it out like that, a helps to actually get more into the characters, because obviously this movie would not be very investing if you did not care about the characters, if you were just going, come on, get to the next Hulk scene. But the Hulk scenes themselves do not feel exploitative. They do not feel like just wall to wall action just for the sake of having action. There is real emotional baggage behind said action, and they go on just long enough. Except for the final fights, the Hulk scenes go on for just long enough to where you are satisfied with the action that you have seen, but also it's not just, like I said, wall to wall action that could potentially take away from the story. But with that said, the final fight does go on for a little bit too long. I mean, I understand wanting to have the Hulk fight. I don't really think I'm giving anything away here. He fights the Abomination. I can understand the need to have this very epic brawl, and at first it is very exciting, but after a while, I don't know. I think it becomes a little too, like I said, it goes on for a little too long. At one point, I was just okay. Can we? Is this going to wrap up soon? I mean, I wasn't going like, oh come on, but I was just going, well, okay. I think we're winding down now, right? I mean, just it starts to get just a little boring toward the end, but it never becomes droning. It never becomes, oh God, please end. No, it's just, like I said, it's just a little too long. So taking those problems into account, the thin script and the slightly overlong climax, those don't really destroy the movie for me. Like I said, this is probably my favorite Avengers setup movie, and I know I'm in a minority on that, but these fascinating characters, Louis Leterrier's very good balance of the very kinetic, high energy action scenes, where he does afford the Hulk appropriate spectacle and scope, and his perfect balance between, or not perfect, but his admirable balance between that and the more character driven atmosphere, the very somber atmospheric scenes with Bruce Banner and Betty Ross and General Ross and Emil Blonsky. I think that makes for a pretty entertaining Hulk flick. I mean, it still gives you the summer action that you were looking for, while also giving you appropriate time to breathe with these genuinely likable characters. I mean, I may be just spinning my wheels here, but yeah, I really like this movie, and I like what they did with the Hulk. And considering, I heard there was a conflict of interest. Now, don't trust my word on this, but I heard there was a conflict of interest between the studio and what the filmmakers wanted to do. Apparently, Edward Norton really got into, or really tried to get into the story process. I mean, he and director Louis Leterrier wanted to tell a more character driven story, while Marvel wanted to be more mainstream in preparation for eventual setup for the Avengers. I mean, they wanted a more traditional summer action flick, especially since the more character driven Ang Lee Hulk didn't really do so well critically. So, considering that conflict of interest and considering this did have a troubled production, I still think it turned out very well. I mean, I've seen this movie a number of times, and honestly, I wouldn't mind watching it again. I mean, I feel like I'm overselling it, but I don't think so. Hopefully, if you're not expecting something along the lines of The Dark Knight or Richard Donner's Superman, I think you'll be entertained. This movie, if nothing else, does one thing right. It focuses on Bruce Banner and does not get carried away with the Hulk. And fundamentally, if they did not get that right, this movie was never going to work. But the fact that they did get that right, and in my opinion, did get it right. So, with flying colors in terms of what they did with a lot of the characters, I think really elevates this past what a lot of people consider it to be. I mean, people consider this. I've seen some people consider this to be the least good of the Avengers setup movies. I don't believe that's true. I still think it's worth a watch, and it's a shame. I would have liked to have seen a sequel with these actors and with these characters. But what can you do?